evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. Thank you so much for joining us here. We talk about the stories that dominated the news and what stories will dominate the coming week. I have with me a very interesting panel of guests today. We have Joel Senyonyi, our former anchor here, who is now running for the Nakawa West Member of Parliament. And we have Suleiman Kakaire, who is running for Bugweri Member of Parliament, speaks for Alliance for National Transformation. He speaks for the People Power Movement and the National Unity Platform. And we have Raymond Mujuni, who in 2026 will be running where? Nowhere. Yes, but
glad to be here.
Yes, one of the biggest stories in the week, previous week and coming up, is the nomination of candidates, and you both have candidates nominating in this coming week. I want us to watch the story of the nomination and the guidelines that the Electoral Commission has given so that we can discuss that. So let's first have that story.
The official program states that 10 presidential aspirants will be nominated by the Electoral Commission on the 2nd and 3rd of November. The venue is Kyambogo University grounds. First to appear before the commission at 10 a.m. is the incumbent Yoweri Museveni, who will be followed by former Security Minister, retired Lieutenant General Henry Tumukunde at 1 p.m. John Katumba, standing on an independent ticket, is scheduled for 2 p.m., while former Army Commander Greg Mugisha Muntu of the Alliance National Transformation will be nominated at 3 p.m. The only woman in the race, Nancy Linda Kalembe, comes in at 4 p.m. On day 2, the National Unity Platform's Robert Kyagulanyi will be nominated at 10 a.m., followed by independent candidate Willie Mayambala at 11 a.m. and FDC's Patrick Boy Amuriat an hour later. At 2 p.m., Fred Mwesige will be nominated, and lastly, another independent candidate, Joseph Chiza Kabuleta, at 3 p.m.
Nomination documents will be presented to us by the proposer and the seconder, after which we'll go through the verification of the nomination documents, and then as and when they satisfy the requirements, we'll make a declaration of the nominated candidate.
However, questions still linger over the nomination of Democratic Party's Norbert Mao, as signatures endorsing his candidates were submitted to the Electoral Commission yesterday.
We cannot talk about people who have not completed the first processes. Right now what we are dealing with are those who have completed the processes. As and when others clear, we will bring them onto the program. Nomination is for 2 days.
The Democratic Party is confident that their flag bearer will be nominated.
We think that the Electoral Commission, by fact that we handed in yesterday, they are still working on the signatures and they are still verifying. And we have no doubt that our candidate's signatures are going to be verified.
The Commission has listed the requirements each aspirant is expected to present.
A completely filled nomination form, which indicates that they are registered voters, they have attained the minimum education requirements, they've been supported by 100 voters from 98 districts. For the case of these 10, we've already given them a certificate of clearance on that. Then, of course, proof of payment of the nomination fee. There are statutory declarations that are supposed to be made by aspiring candidates.
What's different this time around is that the candidates will not be receiving 2 cars and 20 million shillings to conduct their campaigns. Ahead of the nomination exercise next week, presidential aspirants have been reminded to comply with the guidelines that they were given. These include coming with only 10 supporters as well as undergoing a COVID-19 test. Joyce Nakato, NTV Weekend Edition.
Thank you so much, Joyce Nakato, for that story, which starts us off in the conversation. And I'll start with you, Joel. Are these guidelines that you're willing to play by as the nomination of your candidate happens on Tuesday?
You see, the thing about these guidelines is, one, logically it's a bit problematic. Because, so just before we got on air, we were talking about the late Pastor Yiga and the funeral services that have been at his churches. Throngs of people, you know, a rally of sorts. They're going to bid farewell to a man that they loved, a man that shepherded them for some of those who belong to his church and all of that. And here you are saying, for example, you cannot have people standing on the roadside waving to somebody that they love and all of that. You can rest assured it's going to happen. Wherever, at least speaking for my flag bearer's case, Honorable Kyagulanyi, whenever he's going for an activity and so on, people will come out and wave and so on. He's not invited any of them. A couple of days ago, we were going to visit the Katikiro at Bulangi. We had about 3 cars, and we began to move. We didn't invite anybody. By the time we got there were masses of people that were following. And you see, for me, it's not just about the masses of people. It's because those people are hungry for change. And so they see change embodied in this leader or a couple of leaders and so on. So when they talk about 10 people, we already have the 10. And those are the ones that will head out. But you can rest assured, people will come out. And even when they do, as far as I'm concerned, they don't break any law, for heaven's sake. That somebody would stand on their veranda and wave to a candidate that they love. Somebody that they feel that there represents the change that I want to see. So whenever actually as we move, you see police going to those people's verandas, beating them up and so on. I'm thinking, wait a minute, what offense has somebody committed by standing on their veranda or on the outside of their shop to wave at Honorable Kyagulanyi as he passes by? It's preposterous. And the other challenge is that many times there's double standards. So what's good for the goose will not be good for the gander. That the NRM will do things a certain way, but when it comes to the opposition, strict adherence to the guidelines is expected. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, if it is COVID, does COVID catch on the opposition leaders? You saw the NRM primaries and how they happened. You know, you saw how during COVID, especially the lockdown, food was being given out and all these different things by NRM members and leaders, rallies of people, masses of people. But when it comes to opposition, it's a different story altogether. So the double standard is where the problem is. And that's why many people to date, sadly so, still doubt that there is COVID. I was moving through a zone in my constituency in Akawa West called Mulimira. It's a huge zone of people with many folks therein. And then I met some ghetto youth. There's many ghetto people there and so on, young people that have great aspirations, but they're struggling with opportunities and so on. And they sat me down and they said, Mr. Speaker. They called me Speaker. I think the word spokesperson is too complicated for them. They
Or
said,
maybe
Speaker,
you are eyeing the position of Speaker before.
I don't know. Let's see how things go. But they like to call me Speaker. So they sat me down and said, Mr. Speaker, Tuvulide, well, in English said, tell us, is this corona thing really there? For us, we don't think it's there. I told them, guys, are you seeing people dying in the West, the US, and so on? This thing is there. And they told me, sure, how? When the very people who are, you know, saying it is there, implementing the guidelines and so on, for them, they go out and do other things. That was around the time Dr. Jane Ruth Acheng went, held a rally and so on, as they were telling people, you cannot go to churches because of corona. Meanwhile, NRM leaders, Mike Mukula, Professor Ephraim Kamuntu, the gentleman who signed those regulations that Parliament passed, were holding rallies within church. And so these ordinary folks were saying, no, this thing is being used by government to rip us off, to oppress the opposition and so on. So I mean, I was hard pressed to explain to them, guys, you know, this thing is actually there and so on. But you see, to them, they think, no. This thing is being stage managed as far as they're concerned, which is sad because, you know, we need to try and be careful and so on. So the double standards is what I find very problematic.
Suleiman Kakaye, are you willing to play by the guidelines? Is your candidate going to play by the guidelines on nomination day? What does nomination day look like for ANT?
Thank you, Raymond. Good evening, viewers, once again. Those are two questions in one. Let me start with the question of how our planning is for tomorrow when we set out to nominate General Gregory Mugisha Muntu. We have plans as a political party. And indeed, I've been through all these meetings that we are planning for that I've planned for the big day. But unfortunately, how we operationalize or we roll out that plan is largely defined by the regulator, the person supervising the whole process, Electoral Commission, which by law is, which ideally is expected to perform independently, to be independent. But unfortunately, the law, the structural formation set up around which it's arranged does not permit it to operate independently. And even the office bearers, I don't think of Electoral Commission don't have that kind of consciousness and orientation to function independently. So we end up having all our activities shaped and defined eventually by how the outside environment within which we operate is set up. So just like any entity that believes that you have some support, you have people who believe in your cause, we had planned that perhaps you start a setup. All members of the party, well-wishers, all supporters have been invited together with leaders at the party headquarters to participate in the process of, first of all, wishing good blessings, being part of that journey, not to travel with the candidate, but perhaps wish him well on his way to Electoral Commission, then receive him back. But the gathering of the whole process, it was for purposes of, you start with a drive around the city, go to our respective offices as you pick people from different points, and you have perhaps then you collect yourselves at the party headquarters. But the way the rules have been designed and framed, it's right now I cannot with certainty say this is how our plan is going to be like. But in substance, I'll tell you that we intend to launch a slogan which is going together with even the poster, the official poster of General Mugisha Muntu, the platform under which we shall be campaigning, the campaign team as well, and several, at the post-nomination press conference, we plan to give highlights of our manifesto. That's what we plan. That's what we think is going to happen. But the way things are taking shape, I'm afraid things will be like that. Now, the second question is, are you going to comply with the guidelines? You see, compliance with guidelines is premised on the legitimacy a particular guideline enjoys in a setup where it's expected to be complied with. Unfortunately, the way the manner in which guidelines are being given, there is an element of lack of legitimacy. Let me tell you, any guideline to be strictly complied with, it must enjoy those important, around 3 to 4 elements. One, it must have constitutional validity. And to the extent that that guideline has constitutional validity, as a political party, Alliance for National Transformation, we shall respect it if there is a consensus that emanates from the constitutional validity, consensus as enshrined in the Constitution. Unfortunately, most of the guidelines, as I've looked at them, they are an infringement on our rights. So that gives you a response that unfortunately we are likely not to comply with some. Then two, a guideline to be respected and to have to be complied with by an entity like us, we believe that it must have legitimacy. Unfortunately, when you see the reactions that are just coming from my brother Joel here, NUP was not consulted, even us as ANT, we participated, we were, the process of participation in the formulation of guidelines is not inclusive. So the moment stakeholders who are ideally expected to comply and enforce guidelines are not part of the formulation process, those guidelines lack legitimacy. And us as a political entity, unfortunately, we are likely to not respect some of those guidelines. Then lastly, thirdly, the guidelines, for them to have that kind of compliance you expect from us, they must be reasonable, rational, at least they must have that kind of test. Unfortunately, when you look at some of these guidelines, they are irrational, they are not reasonable. They don't meet the common man standard that, okay, you're telling a leader to do ABC, but within what time are you telling that person to do it? For instance, you've just told me that they have changed just yes. The Minister for ICT, yes, national guidance, for communication and national guidance has just given some other guidelines, yes. How they will pick some candidates from some. It's just ridiculous how they are coming up with guidelines, arbitrarily, without any kind of consistency. You keep jumping from one thing to another. The last thing is the objective of a particular guideline. Right now, when you observe what is influencing guidelines ideally is supposed to be looking at the law under which the guidelines are coming. Ideally, it's supposed to be Electoral Commission Act and other laws incidental to the organizing of elections, and together trying to manage the process of not spreading the coronavirus. Unfortunately, that objective has been lost. But as an individual or as a group of people within the Alliance for National Transformation, are we surprised by this? Well, this is the system. This is how the NRM operates. That they'll keep switching from one position to another, that level of inconsistency. That one time you said the political opposition you should do A, B, C, which is expected of everyone, but the enforcement of such a regulation or guideline is restricted to a group of people based on how they think about the government. And that is the opposition. The opposition has been made a victim of these guidelines as opposed to having the guidelines enforced generally and uniformly. Yes. And that is the problem. That's where we come from, that it indeed vindicates those who hold a view, including me as an individual, that this conditioning, the conditioning of this government, its outlook is not steered towards or committed to organizing a free and fair election. Indeed, the credibility of the election is tainted by some of these actions.
Joel, Suleiman raises an important point on legitimacy. You're in a contest for power. At the heart of it, the election is really a contest for power. You all agree that COVID-19 exists, and that is the reason for why the guidelines are being made currently. What is it about the guidelines now that you don't agree with as they are?
No, I actually don't agree that these guidelines are put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. Otherwise, if this government was so concerned about COVID-19, they would have clamped down heavily on NRM leaders who, during, especially the time when it was a real scare, were going all over the place, holding rallies and so on. If this government was concerned about COVID-19, they would not have held their primaries the way they did. You saw the throngs of people, no social distancing, no masks, no nothing. You can't tell me that this government is concerned about COVID-19. Of course they are not, all right? So these guidelines, in and of themselves, are put in place to oppress the opposition. That's the bottom line. If it was COVID-19, you'd see consistency in them saying, wait a minute, COVID-19 is in place. Because you see, if it's COVID-19, it can affect anybody, all right? It is people who are NRM and yellow are not immune as far as I'm concerned. But it is certainly not COVID-19. It is to oppress the opposition. It is to target them. It is to try and see how do we cut this guy's speed. You remember, and the president was on TV and confessed and said, but now why are you arresting Honorable Zake and you're not arresting the NRM people? But you see, he just said it politically to try and gain political capital. If he was serious about it, he would have followed through. As one, the president of the country, but also as the leader of the party to which these people belonged. And even after he said that, day after day after day, we saw many NRM leaders going all out and doing whatever it is that they wanted. So clearly, this is targeting the operation. Because, I mean, just look at the way the city is operating. I don't know when you were last in Chikubo. Man, that place is, it's like a rally.
Or the area just around Gazaland, Min Place,
etc.
You know, just to space, that space you have almost hundreds of southern.
So you go to Owino, you go to many of these different places. We're just talking about, the funeral service of the late Pastor Yiga and many other places. For as long as it's not a political threat, because Chikubo, it's not an opposition gathering, so it's okay. No problem. Owino is not an opposition gathering, so it's okay. NRM primaries, it's not opposition, so it's okay. If NRM leaders are gathering people at their homes and so on, giving out food, it's okay. But if it is opposition, they'll clamp down heavily on you. So as far as I'm concerned, this has nothing to do with COVID-19. It has everything to do with oppressing the opposition.
But shouldn't the opposition also take some political responsibility to say, we won't expose our supporters to COVID-19?
Are we saying we want to expose them? I don't think we are saying that, all right? So like I'm saying, they asked for 10 people and we're saying ridiculous as all of these things are. We have our 10 prepared and we are going all out. But also, you see, if you want, whether it be the opposition or citizens generally, to buy into your program as a government, you must show, one, consistency. 2, that there's no double standards. Otherwise, it becomes difficult. I've told you about my conversation with Ghetto Youth in Mulimbira. I was saying, no, this thing doesn't exist. And I was at odds to explain to them COVID-19 actually exists. But you see, because of the actions of people in government, they're thinking, no, this thing doesn't exist. They're using it to steal our money, to oppress us, and all these different things. You know, so if you want citizens, not just opposition, let's broaden it. If you want citizens really to buy into what you are doing as a leadership, they must see goodwill. There's an interesting book, I imagine you have read it, From Third World to Singapore, by Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah, from third world
From
to
third world to first
world.
Yes.
What did
By
I
Lee
say?
Kuan Yew.
From third world to first
First
world
World
by Lee Kuan Yew. It's a voluminous book, but an interesting read. I didn't quite agree with everything that Lee Kuan Yew did. I think that, you know, at some point he was very macho, high-handed on the media, which is a space that I belong to generally. But see, he had goodwill from the people of his country. He cracked down on corruption. People saw that this guy is serving our country. When you're corrupt, whether you're a relative or whatever behind bars, he was using taxpayers' money to deliver services. You should know that at some point we're at the same level with Singapore, even better. But look at us today. You know, so his people that side, they believed in because they saw goodwill. Even when he said, you know what, let's increase taxes. People said, this man is increasing our taxes for a good reason. Yes, it's going to press us a little bit, we're going to pay more, but we are going to get value out of it in form of services, in form of healthcare, education for our children, bolstering our economy and so on. That's when people, the citizenry, have confidence in the leadership. That's when the leadership has got goodwill. Okay, so the people will have no problem to say, all right, what our leader is suggesting, it might, you know, in one way cause us a bit of discomfort, but he means well or she means well for us. In our case, no, it's totally opposite. So that's why you'll see people fighting hard because they're saying, no, this year is not meant for our good. Why? Because the leaders have lost goodwill among the citizenry. Because time and again, they clearly show that they're not on the side of the people, that whatever they do is for their own end. So even once in a blue moon, when they're trying to do something right, there will be resistance. Why? Because there's consistency in our leaders doing things for their own good, not for the good of the people.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a very short break, but when we come back, we'll discuss the story on how campaigns will be conducted under these COVID-19 regulations and whether political parties actually are comfortable with the way the campaigns will be conducted. But let's first take a break. Thank you so much for staying with us on the Fourth Estate. Now, the other thing that's contested during this campaign period is just how will campaigns be conducted under this COVID-19 regulation. The Electoral Commission has issued a flurry of regulations that political parties must play by. But already some members of different political parties are not playing by those rules. So we have a story this week that explores that particular aspect and want to discuss it.
Today, NRM leaders in Kampala launched the Kampala Form 7 Task Force to mobilize support for President Museveni in the coming election. They pledged to sweep the opposition out of Kampala.
We should work as a team with the other task force where we shall share ideas, the Buganda Kampala Task Force.
Let them talk. We will have to work out to do. We are ready to win in Kampala.
In Lugala, Lubaga Division, a group calling themselves the Yellow Teachers Task Force, have taken on a similar task.
We are here saying that we are supporting President Museveni 100%, and we are here to lead him win at 90%.
Last week, the White Army, led by one of President Museveni's chief advisors, Sumi Nabagirika, warned that the growing support of no presidential aspirant Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu should not be undermined, and this task force would earn for votes for its candidate. The trend is not new and usually happens as the elections approach, but the question is the motive genuine or are they opportunists? Earlier this month, NRM Buganda region leaders launched a joint task force for the same reason. His team is led by the NRM Central Executive Committee Vice Chairman for the Central Region, Godfrey Chiwanda Subi. In August this year, the Yoro Brigade Association opened an office in Arua to mobilize support for President Museveni. It had been formed in 2011 to promote party activities, and 2016 helped popularize the party in the Western region. Just this week, a team of young people in Kampala's Nakao division said they would push for support from Museveni's election. Well, in 2015, a band of artists came up with a song, Tubongenawe. NTV spoke to political scholar Yusuf Serunkuma.
Right, you find people in the taxi park, market vendors, youth groups, all different interest groups looking at Museveni stay in power as an enabler to their access to whatever resources they want, right? But also because they are convinced the man is not going. He's not going anywhere, so the best way is to present yourself as in support of the man so that when time comes, you are easily enabled access to resources.
Serunkuma says many players use any and all means during election season to seek money from the NRM. He says there are repercussions for this behavior, but Chiwanda feels otherwise.
There's a bit of psychophancy in there, there's a bit of opportunism, but they're genuine because they know the man is not going, right? But then there's another group which is probably connected by the security forces to ensure that Museveni stays in power. So that group, I mean the Karate boys who came out recently, the different young men, say crime preventers may come back, the LDUs, they're working with the establishment, the normal established security establishment to make sure that Museveni stays in power.
We have no problem at all with that. The only thing that we always tell such groups is always to liaise with the party structures, liaise with the chairman of the village, liaise with the parish level, liaise with the sub-county, liaise with the national organizing committee or task force the president is going to put in place.
Chiwanda says it is a duty of every NRM member to mobilize support for the party.
Welcome everyone, because it doesn't mean that somebody to campaign for President Yoweri Museveni should be necessarily to be on the party structures.
Serunkuma also warns that such groups will continue to be formed, especially in the middle of the general campaigns. Ivan Chimulichigozi, NTV.
Thank you so much, Ivan Chimulichigozi, for that story on the political groups that are being formed ahead of the 2021 election. I wanted to start with you, Suleiman Kakaire. Already, there are regulations, and the National Unity Platform has suffered. A majority of the groups that the National Unity Platform had been formed were being broken up by police because of apparently not meeting the COVID-19 regulations. Some of them for apparently wearing the beret, which Joel Senyonyi is wearing right now. The military says that's custody of them. But the NRM seems to have a good day for themselves in terms of the political groups that they're creating. And equally yourselves, you haven't had a bad day as Alliance for National Transformation. Is there something about the political competition space that's tweaked?
Well, at times I don't want to debate regulations or guidelines or laws as laws. I debate them from a perspective. I presuppose the two of you and perhaps are familiar with the idea of how laws are neither independent of the economic and nor removed from the economic and political relations within which they are conceived, meaning that the law must be interpreted in a law or guideline or regulation or whichever thing they are enforcing as a law enforcement organ must be understood from the context of the power structure within which they are conceived. The reason why you find that the opposition suffers from a restriction justified on from the perspective of the law, and the NRM doesn't, it validates that view that actually these laws are put in place for a particular group of people. But you see, Raymond, we need to understand the system that we are dealing with. Does it believe in organized politics that is civil in nature? Because if you don't understand that, you miss the point and start to look at all these things as mistakes, as deviations, as shortcomings, without having a clear understanding of the ideology that anchors them. This is a political formation, a political establishment that has theorized that the best way to get power is military. It has consolidated it through military. Leave the thing of going back to Ugandans and seek for a constitutional consensus. The committee led by former Chief Justice Odoki moving around to gather opinions. When you realize that actually things that ideally were supposed to be part of that document somewhere left out. So if you don't have that understanding that we are dealing with a hybrid regime, that on the outlook shows that perhaps we are democratic, but beneath it, which is the dominant view, the dominant ideology, it believes in violence, it believes in military, it believes in politics that is not civil in nature, because that's not part of their ethos. So when you get that clear understanding, for instance, you point out the Alliance for National Transformation. Perhaps we've been victims, only that we've not popularized why some of our grievances so much. But you remember very well that we had planned to organize a delegates conference, but we never received approval for it. And yet there are many gatherings that have taken place in the country, which seemingly take the shape of a delegate conference. There are many things that are happening. And let me tell you, at every turn of the moment, when we come off as people who are becoming an existential threat to the system, to the government, we are going to fall victims. No one is going to be spared from that, because that is the only way, that is the best way they have been, that is the best way they understand as the best method to deal with political opposition, to deal with a dissenting voice. It's not about engaging, that we are going to debate ideas, go to Ugandans and sell our ideas and they pick out the best idea, or they are going to touch into our characters. They are controlling even participation of the masses. They are trying to narrow that space of civil engagement. But you see, the problem that comes with that is that in the long run, you're trying to plant seeds of violence, which will eventually eat up even the opposition and the entire political fabric of Uganda.
I want to bring in Joel here. Joel, how will you conduct a campaign in these kinds of regulations, where the Electoral Commission has numbers that they're giving you, that these are the numbers you must have in your campaign, but we're already seeing some members of different parties exceeding those numbers? Is this going to be a campaign built solely on defiance? Is it going to be a campaign built on the COVID-19? Is COVID-19 going to be the major campaign issue as it stands now?
So there's two things there, Rin. There's issues of the campaign, but then there's the form, how the campaign is going to be. I would like to think that the NRM is going to show us how these campaigns are going to be run. They're going to set out and hold rallies, mega rallies, and so on. And you will not blame the opposition for doing the same. Nonetheless, of course, as the NRM will hold their rallies, mega rallies, it will be police and the army protecting them. While on the other hand, as the opposition gets to do the same, police and the army will come down cracking heavily the whip against them, as if COVID-19 only affects the opposition and not the NRM. Remember, I told you that this has got nothing to do with COVID-19, nothing whatsoever. This government does not care. It's not about COVID-19, no. Otherwise then, the same would be applied across and say, no, whether it be NRM or opposition, the ground should be leveled, that everybody should play by this and so on. But just wait, and we'll be seeing on this very TV station and several others the rallies of the NRM. But as far as we're concerned, we're going to go out there and interact with the people.
I want to ask both of you now, because our time is really eating up. I want to ask you about particularly media. You've both been in the media. Are you comfortable with the media attention that your political entities are getting at the moment? And if you're not comfortable, what do you think is the problem?
So there's media houses that are doing their best to cover all. You know, one of them is this one, where we are, and some others. But there's certain media houses that are skewed a certain way. They'll throw headlines clearly targeting particular opposition candidates and so on. It's even worse when you go out of Kampala, upcountry. Media houses are not giving access to opposition figures. About a week and a half ago, the Lango Radio Station Owners Association came out and said, unfortunately, we are not able to host NUP candidates. And the reason was, they said, excuse me, they said, we got calls, phone calls from UCC. If you host NUP candidates, we're going to withdraw your license. They got calls from police and RDCs in those various areas. They said, look, if you host NUP candidates, we're going to come and shut you down. And so they told our candidates, we're sorry, we are not able to host you. And this keeps happening. Meantime, you're saying the campaigns should be on media, TV, radio, and all of that. But then access is not available to everybody. When Mr. Museveni goes on TV, as a rule of thumb, whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter that NTV you have some amazing program to run or that somebody paid for the airspace, you will throw them out and you've got to run Mr. Museveni's whatever it is that he is saying, whether you like it or not, because your license just could be withdrawn. Yeah, but it's not the same case for other opposition leaders. You saw Honorable Chagulanyi trying to hold the talk show in Mbale. And they said, no, you cannot hold it here. You saw Dr. Kizza Besigye not long ago. He was literally pulled out of a radio station and of studio and several others. You know, so there's a challenge with the media. Also partly because many media houses, many radio stations across the country are owned by NRM leaders, whether it be ministers, NRM MPs and so on. Those ones are easily given licenses because those are going to push our government propaganda. If it's a government official, of course, giving out the license. But if it's opposition figure, I know several opposition figures that have tried to open up offices and they have failed. A few have succeeded against all odds, but several others, they've still denied them jazz. So it's deliberate. It's deliberate. But even those that are owned by decent business people, people who have no problem, it's tough. It's tough. And some of them will be honest and say, I remember the time we were trying to get Honorable Chagulanyi across the country, different radio stations, and some were very honest with us, even after we had booked. He said, look, we are sorry. We got a call from the RDC that will come and invade our studios, they will shut down the radio station and so on. We are sorry. Here is the money you used to book. Okay. Others, of course, will try and veer around and say, that day I remember we had forgotten. We had booked another program altogether and that kind of situation. So there's a challenge with media. It is not balanced. That has been the case for a very long time. In 2011, I was still at UBC. I began my media career in 2006 at UBC. And I remember in 2011, during the campaigns, Dr. Kizza Besigye paid money to be hosted on UBC. This is a government broadcaster, public broadcaster. They're supposed to avail airspace to everybody freely, by the way. So they couldn't avail it freely, and he paid. The managers took the money and they said, we shall not host you. I told them, but now, really, we are becoming thieves. You've taken the man's money, you cannot host him. At the very least, at least refund the money. And still they refused. He went to court, he won that case eventually. I hope they reimbursed him and that kind of situation. But that's the way things are, very unfortunately.
Suleiman, are you comfortable with the media space you're getting, the media acreage that your political party is getting?
Well, for now, I think we are okay. But it can be, although we believe that it can be better than what it is today, because largely coverage has been limited to the operational standards of a media house, where they are just looking at the possibility of the story getting us to the market, which becomes problematic. And I think, bearing in mind that government has told us that, okay, not government, but basically those who are holding power have defined the rules that you are the only platform that is available to you as a primary platform for campaigns is going to be media. They needed to have subsidized private media, because if you look at media, leaving this whole thing exercise to private media and the market, it becomes problematic for political entities to buy space. when push comes to shove, it will be very hard to have access. But two, the second thing is when you look at the situation of the media today, the media landscape, where private media is largely owned by people who are connected to the NRM or NRM functionaries, as it was found out in a report did by Professor Juko in that book, the titled The Fourth Estate. Majority of them are stations that are out of the city and are providing access to the remotest voter in Uganda. They are owned by NRM functionaries. What does it mean? That when push comes to shove, the political opposition will not have access to those people. They will not talk to those people. They will not have their agendas reach out to those people, which is absurd. And that gives you the understanding of where we stand. That are we going for an election, or we are going for a system that purely legitimizes a particular
Kakaira and Joel, in these last minutes, I just want you've both been journalists before. How would you want newsrooms to frame this election? What kind of frame do you want this election to take? Let's start with you, Kakaira.
Well, I have two frames that I'm much interested in this election. One of the most important frames that has been ignored is the political transition, which is happening, which is internally within the NRM, the contradictions within the NRM, and how they are playing out in this election, but also influencing developments within the political opposition. That is very, very important. It's one of the frames that I believe that must be covered. The second frame, which is very important, is the class struggle. I'm much interested in a class struggle. Trying to look, let's stop just looking at the political opposition and the status quo. It narrows the conversation because you can have a change-seeking group which comes off as a change-seeking group, and its main interest, its preoccupation is change. But within the conversation, we must understand the agendas. Change for what? The democracy-seeking forces. But seeking change for which group of people? It's a very important aspect or frame that we must look out for, and that requires us to scrutinize, that requires the media to scrutinize manifestos, that requires the media to scrutinize the individual rhetoric, that requires the media to scrutinize who are the people funding each group, that requires the media to look at the main players, what portion of the economy, what portion do they share in the economy, who are they basically. It's a very important aspect of the conversation, because for some of us, we've taken an analysis of the situation and we've come to a conclusion that we don't see, we are left wing. Then there are those who are seeking for change and they are right wing. Actually, across political parties, it's not just restricted to ANT or People Power or DP. Let's analyze individual political parties and give the voters a picture of the ideological frameworks under which they are operating. And that requires you to look at things like the movement of global capital, questions like globalization, questions like identity, very important questions.
Well, Joel, if you could still edit the NTV bulletin, what kind of frame would you want NTV to report this election?
Two things for me. One, I am hoping that the media will focus quite a bit on what's going on out there in terms of the double standards. I hope that clearly comes out. You know, today, for example, you know, the whole of yesterday, we had people putting up posters of Honorable Kyagulanyi within Chambogo and several other areas. And today, NRM fellows tore a number of them, others they just pasted those of President Museveni. And so you can see the one of Honorable Kyagulanyi in the background and so on with the flag. And they have pasted under the watch and supervision and protection of police. So I hope that the media can really get to capture these things that are happening out there, the injustices and so on. But two, and for me very importantly, I'm hoping that the media will be able to reach out to the ordinary people such that their voices get to be heard, you know. Sometimes I get bothered. You look at an analysis story and so there's these people that you guys call analysts. And I say this with respect really. Analysts. scholars and so on, guys who sit in their offices here in Kampala and imagine they know whatever is happening across the country. And also sadly for the media, they use the same fellows. You find NTV using the same guy, NBS using the same fellow, and I don't know who else and so on. He's the one who knows it all and thinks for the ordinary person. And look, I'm not trying to really downplay their role. You know, I think that they should have their thoughts out there too as analysis and so on. But can we get to where the ordinary people are? Can we get to hear their voices? What are they saying about these different things? What are they saying about the injustice? What are they saying about our country's economy? Because you see, for them, they feel it, all right? What are they saying about the double standards? What are they talking about the politics and all these different things? I would like to see that. I would like to see that a lot more in the news stories that I see, you know, across all media houses, as opposed to, so you come interview Senyonyi, somebody from the NRM, then get quote-unquote analyst, and it's the same analyst that is being used across, as if the people are not out there too. Let's go to them. Let's go to these ghettos and interact with these people, all right? They may not speak very good English, but you see, they're Ugandans, they have something to say, and their voice must come out. Besides, they're the ones that are beaten down by everything that happens, whether it be the economy, human rights, injustice, and all these different things. Can we have their voice out?
That speaks to your voter base. Someone would say you're campaigning for your voter base, because that's the core of your voter base.
Those are the people that are hungry for change. But most importantly, their voice needs to go out there to whoever is seeking to lead them, not just us, you know. So yes, we are glad we connect with them very easily. But you see, the people that are in power, they need to hear, because many of them are out of touch. That's why they will sit somewhere in their air-conditioned offices and say things like, there are things that are just so bothersome and ridiculous. And it is understandable, because 35 years later, somebody is totally out of touch. They don't know what's happening to the ordinary people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel. Thank you so much, Suleiman, for the show. I see my producer is really angry that we have spent much of our time. But thank you so much, our viewers who've come to watch The Fourth Estate. We'll return next Sunday with more stories, context and analysis on how the media covered stories.